believe that leadership isn't a position or a role, it's an action and a choice. I believe that leadership can be learned. I believe that great leaders emerge from adversity. I believe that Happy Valley is full of great leaders. These are their stories. Welcome to the Penn State Leaders Podcast. So today I've got with me Bill Wrobleski. Bill's the Associate Vice President for Infrastructure who works in Penn State IT. So Bill's one of my peers here in Penn State's Information Technology Group. So Bill, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks, Dave. Look forward to chatting.
So we'll jump right in. So Bill, you not originally a Penn Stater. Tell me how you got to Penn State.
Well, but again, thanks for having me, Dave. I spent most of my career in Michigan, and I get a lot of grief from my Penn State friends about that, especially on football Saturdays. But after about 26, 27 years at Michigan, I decided it was time to move on, and I was able. So my wife and I started looking around, and I took a job at University of Hawaii. So I was there I'd been there for about 4.5 years or so. But when we went there, my wife and I agreed we'd go for about 5 years, and then we'd think about what's next, because it's a long way away from friends and family and such. But it was pretty cool to live there. But I met up with some colleagues, particularly Jennifer Sparrow, Jen Stedland, and I'm in a national group of IT leaders that meets 3 times a year, and I had met with them a few times, and they started twisting my arm and talking to me, and I told them no. I said, look, I'm in Hawaii, state college does not sound that interesting to me. But I actually ran it by my wife and said, what do you think about Pennsylvania? And she said, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. So then we started talking more and got serious. What was the job about? What was interesting? And so pursued it and joined, then came here in the February of 2018.
Great. Well, I love the sense of adventure that you and your wife have.
Well, it's funny because if you would have known us before in our life, we didn't really have that. We lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan our whole lives. We both went to Ann Arbor Pioneer High School. I went to Michigan. She went to Michigan State. I don't hold that against her too much. And then, and so we had lived our whole lives in Ann Arbor. So it's just the last 10 years we've sort of taken a little more travel and adventure. Yeah, for sure.
That's great. So Bill, as you think about your leadership journey, are there any individual people or groups of people that have influenced you?
Well, it's sort of maybe a funny one and then a serious one. The funny one is sort of that there was a woman that, I guess I could say the names here, Renee Frost, someone I think of highly of, who was a leader when I was a sort of a junior, maybe in my late 20s or so, or early 30s. And she gave me an opportunity to participate and actually take a big leadership role in a big ERP implementation. And she came to Hawaii and we went around the island for a day, and I said to her, what the heck were you thinking? Like, as I look back now at how naive I was and how ignorant I was. And she was laughing, and obviously she thought I had some promise, and it ended up working out. But I thought that was great leadership, that she took this big risk with somebody. I often ask myself, would I take that same risk with other leaders? I think it's a good question for us to ask. Are we giving everyone the benefit of the doubt? Are we seeing that promise and what's possible, not just maybe what could go wrong? So that's sort of a lighter one, just because I think she just took too big of a risk there, but it worked out for me. But the leader I probably modeled myself after most was the person who, after that, I ended up working for, which is Laura Patterson. Laura Patterson was the chief information officer at Michigan. She had some other roles where that I worked for her under as well. And what Laura sort of brought was a few things. One, she really empowers people, right? So it was like, I felt like I was trusted. I was given key responsibility. I was, allowed to, fail or succeed. I had support, but I really felt like that I had that. So I've tried to do that with my leadership. I try not to micromanage too much. I try to give people a chance to do things, maybe too much sometimes. I don't know. But then the other key thing I think Laura brought to my attention that I started to understand was the idea of team. And she spent a lot of time trying to build our leadership team. And I didn't realize it at the time, but we had a great team. Like when you're in the midst of something that's really good, sometimes you don't appreciate it. And I look back and I've talked to some of the people who were on that team, and they said the same thing. I said, yeah, that was really good. I didn't appreciate it at the time. And frankly, one of the reasons I came to Penn State was because I was searching for that. I really wanted to be on an excellent team. And when I started talking with Jennifer and Jen and the other people at Penn State, I was like, okay, this is an opportunity to be with a really great group of people. Because what I found is that's where I get my satisfaction. And I really got that from Laura, where I could see if you invest in people, if you build high levels of trust, it creates a really fun and working environment and productive working environment.
So that's really interesting, because a lot of times I think when people think about leadership, they think about the team I'm leading, right? And you're bringing up a really interesting aspect, which is every leader is part of another team, right? And that relationship with your peers and how you as a group lead the organization is as important, maybe sometimes even more important than how you lead individually.
Well, I often ask people, I say, think about your favorite job, or the time you were happiest in your career. And then I say, now, were you on a great team? and the answer is always yes, I was, right? Mm-hmm. So I just think who you're working with, and you're right, there's both kinds of teams, the teams that work for you and the teams are your peers who work with you. That really plays a big role in your ability to succeed and be happy, I think, for a lot of us, because I think most of us we really value what the organization is going to do. We want to be part of a successful group. And it brings more joy to be doing that with a bunch of people we respect and like than just doing it on our own, right? So so that's been very foundational to me ever since I worked for Laura.
And I would say, and I don't know that this is unique to IT, but it's rare that you can perform highly with just the people who work for you, right? There's these interplay that has to happen across teams, right? And so this ability to work across the organization because you have those good relationships and that strong team helps the overall performance of the organization also, I would say.
Right, and it helps you just to, I think that's right. I think the university benefits, we always talk about having a diverse group of people, right? If you get more thoughts and perspectives you bring to things, are just better. But I also just think as an individual, when you have a high level of trust, you can grow faster. I can tell you here, Jen Stedlin has pulled me aside a couple times. I'll just call her up because I respect her as well, and said, Bill, here's something that you didn't do well, or that someone was concerned about what you said or how you said it. And it's like, I'm not sure I always reacted perfectly to that, but it was always brought this high level of trust. And it was like, and I have grown because of that. And Dave, you and I do the same thing with each other. We give each other really direct feedback. I mean, that makes us, better colleagues. It makes us better individual team members. It's to me the way I want to work, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. So Bill, thinking back in your leadership journey, was there a time of adversity that you went through that formed part of how you lead today?
Well, I'd like to think, one thing comes to mind, although I'm sure there are many, but one example comes to mind where I think I've learned from it, but you can say, Dave, if I've really learned from it that much. So there was a time when I was working for Laura, and we were going to undergo a major change. In fact, what we were going to do is we were going to change the way we were compensating everybody, right? So the compensation model was going to change, which is, we're touching the third rail, right? Yeah. So it was a very big project. There was a lot of investment of it. It ended up being a really successful effort, but we had an excellent HR leader who was driving this. And I was still a pretty junior leader, right? I hadn't really been through this kind of change. And frankly, when you go through this, there's a lot of steps because there's a lot of data analysis, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of prioritization. And the first amount that the information we were given was just wrong. To this day, I will tell you, I was right? I was right. I know I was right. But the way I presented it was so poor that I undermined my message. Right? Like it didn't matter that I was right. I didn't do it in a constructive, team-oriented, us against the problem kind of. It was definitely, I came off as critical. And I regret that. It's been 20 years. I still regret that. And that leader who I now have, she walked out of the room crying, right? And that's when I realized, oh my God, what the heck, have I done? So, and I remember the next day, and maybe this is the key leadership lesson for me. I remember the next day I was walking to work and I was thinking, I cannot be successful if I don't have an excellent relationship with this person. And so I made it my goal for the next year to say, it sounds sort of manipulative, but it wasn't. It was really from my heart. I am going to improve this relationship. So I set up meetings. I had honest discussions. I actually put it in we have work plans back in Michigan where you put, much like we have goals in Work Lion, I put a goal, going to have an excellent relationship with this person. And I remember at the end of the year getting an exceeds expectations. Not because I was maybe thriving, but because, and Laura called it out. She said, wow, you and this person are doing so well together. This is exactly what I want. And so that was, to me, was a few lessons. One, I've got to really learn how to think up and present my words more thoughtfully, because I can be a little abrasive sometimes. So I got to be careful. And then two, when you do make a mistake, you can turn that into a success. You just have to take time and you have to invest effort. You don't have to be defined just by what you've done badly. You can turn that into what you do well. So I don't know if Dave, if that resonates, or if you think I actually did learn that lesson.
Well, no, absolutely. I absolutely. I haven't seen that, Bill, in my relationship with you. I mean, I see when you are confident that you're right about something, right? I know when you have that sense, but I also have very much seen you being very thoughtful about how you deliver a message, and that, you can be right or you can be successful, right? And being successful is better. And I think what I really like about that story is the fact that after it happened, you were reflective enough about you knew this was wrong, and then intentional enough to figure out a plan for how to work on it, to make it not just, put a Band-Aid on it to heal it, but really then strengthen it, right? So turn that into scar tissue that's even stronger than regular skin, right?
That's right. And I've used that story with a lot of people that have worked for me that I see struggling in an area. Because I have found as a leader, if I share openly or vulnerably where my mistakes were, that it helps them. I can also add, what I did at the time is I had some trusted colleagues that I went to and who were in that room. And said, what would you do? So one was John Guzman, who's now was a former chief information officer at Notre Dame. And we sat down for a long time and so I tried to take advice. And so I would recommend that to other leaders. It's like, yeah, you got it. You have to be open. You're going to have to, it hurts. It's embarrassing. It's frustrating. But if you really want to grow, that's the kind of stuff you have to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I mean, I think in addition to being self-reflective is having people that you trust around you that will tell you the truth, and
right.
You've built those relationships, and that pays off in the long run. Yeah, that's great. So Bill, how do you learn about leadership, right? So I always believe that leadership, we're constantly learning and growing. It's a journey you never get to the end of. Any books or authors or podcasts or activities that you do to improve your leadership?
Generally reading. Generally, I do a lot of podcast listening, but not always on leadership topics. It's more for enjoyment. But I really value those. The author that's probably been most influential is Patrick Lencioni. So who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of Team. If people haven't read that book, I would highly recommend it. His writing style not be for everybody, but it's really light, so it can be read very quickly. He has another one called The Ideal Team Player. He got a series of these books. And the basic premise of Lencioni's work is that trust is the underpinnings of a successful team and a successful organization. And that particular book, 5 Dysfunctions, is what Laura used to get us going as a team. We all read it. I remember while reading it, and then we had a series of meetings, including some retreats where we had to be very vulnerable and share specifics about our working relationships with each other. And so I would recommend people read that and think carefully about it. And if you're trying to build a great team, use it. We've done that in my infrastructure group. We've used that book. And I think if you talk to folks, there's a high level of trust there because we've spent some time intentionally working through that. So those, when I get recommendations, you recommended a book to me, Dave. Several books to me, Dave. And I try to follow up when people do, because I enjoy. I enjoy the general topic of leadership. But that's the one. Lencioni's books are the ones I would recommend.
That's interesting. The last podcast I did with someone who's not in IT recommended a Patrick Lencioni book, and it wasn't one about It wasn't the ones that I have heard of though, like that you mentioned. It had to do with customer experience. So that was one I need to look up and learn more
Okay,
about.
good.
Yeah. So Bill, do you have any web or social media presence if someone wants to learn a little more about you and how you think and lead?
Not really. I do Twitter, so if you want to, you can follow me on Twitter, Bill Wrobleski, but I don't do a whole lot. I'm more of a stalker in social media. But I'm also open if there's leaders in Penn State IT that would just like to sit down and talk for a half hour. Hey, I'm always game to do that. I love these topics, right? They're interesting, and it's always fun to pick each other's brain and where people are in their career and stuff. So feel free to reach out to me directly if folks would like to talk.
That's great. Thanks for offering that. And Bill, thank you for your time, and thank you for coming to Penn State and for your leadership and service here to our university.
Well, good luck with the podcast, Dave. I hope it works great.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you for listening to the Happy Valley Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Give us a review and share us with others. You can follow us on Twitter at HV Leader Podcast and on YouTube at Happy Valley Leaders Podcast. Remember, leadership is an action and a choice, so go be a leader.